All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my good buddy Steve Horn. Steven's an investigative journalist whose work has been seen in The Nation, The Guardian, Center for Media and Democracy, Alternet. He is a research fellow at DeSmogBlog, which you can find at DeSmogBlog.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at Steve_Horn1022. Steve, thank you for being on the show again.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Steve, in October, one of the largest onshore oil spills in U.S. history actually happened in the state of North Dakota. And we actually have an update on that spill. But before we get to the update, if people aren't familiar or they don't remember, tell them what exactly happened in North Dakota in October.
Sure. So in October, actually it was late September into early October. Official spill date was September 29th. What makes it tricky is that was in the midst of the government shutdown, so no one actually heard about the spill until early October, I think maybe 10 days after the spill happened. So at that time, on September 29th, over 800,000 gallons of oil that was fracked via hydraulic fracturing or fracking from the Bakken Shale Basin in North Dakota spilled in actually a pretty small pipeline that it was only, basically carrying oil to a rail terminal, which was going to bring that oil eastward to Albany, actually, and then to be barged up and down the Hudson River. So it was really just a pipeline to facilitate the rail market, which went eastward. But this spill was so massive, and no one heard about it for 10 days, mostly because all the federal agencies that were in place to respond to spills weren't open, including the ones that you could go online and check out whether or not there are spills. So the North Dakota government did its best job not to tell anyone about it. So. Although I did get records that showed that they were talking about it quite a bit among one another, they just didn't go through the effort of telling the public it happened. So a farmer in that area actually ended up telling a reporter at the Associated Press that it happened, and then there was quite a bit more press attention after that. Since then, there hasn't been a whole lot of press attention. I think that the most press attention was maybe in the first couple of weeks of October. And I think that has something to do with this update that I found, and that's who's helping the company that was responsible for the spill, Tesoro Logistics. And that's a firm by the name of Witt O'Brien's. Actually, used to be known as O'Brien Oil Pollution Service Inc., which I guess they thought it was funny that they called themselves Oops Inc. as the acronym. So this firm has been around for quite a long time, since before the Exxon Valdez spill. It's basically been the one that oil companies go to literally cover their tracks, cover themselves up for their public relations efforts after spills. So they were there for the Exxon Valdez spill. They were there for the huge BP Gulf oil spill. They were there recently for the Arkansas Mayflower tar sands spill that Exxon was responsible for. They were there in Michigan for the biggest on-land tar sand spill, at least in U.S. history, that happened in the Kalamazoo River and around the Kalamazoo River in 2010, right after the BP Gulf oil spill. So they've definitely, I mean, if you look at the playbook of what an oil company does after a huge spill in the U.S., at least, they often go to this firm, Witt O'Brien's. There's, as I pointed out in my piece, sort of a revolving door between FEMA people, Federal Emergency Management Agency people, and who end up leaving there and going to this firm and making quite a bit more money doing oil spill response, which actually ends up being crisis communications management after spills. So that's what's happening right now in North Dakota. They created a website called TeseroAlert.com, in which they're basically putting out occasional press releases about how well the oil spill cleanup is going, which is funny because I talked to someone at the North Dakota Department of Health in an earlier story, and he told me their remediation plan and their cleanup plan involves something that he called natural remediation, which means that over the winter, magically the oil may just disappear,
freeze, freeze and disappear and go up into
Yeah.
the air.
So I kind of joked at the end of my article somewhat and called it like a winter whitewash in which they're going to wash away the oil. But the scary thing is that the spill took place on around a huge wheat field where a lot of people in the area and maybe even in the Midwest on the whole in the region get their food, get wheat products from, and that's going to be the legacy of this spill. This firm, Widow Bryan's, has no interest in actually helping facilitate a real cleanup, and I don't know if you even can clean up something that's so massive in a way that would be healthy. But that's what's going on in North Dakota right now.
Yeah, it's funny. Like when you start listing off all of the oil spills that they've actually been involved with, it really reminds me of Harvey Keitel's character in Pulp Fiction, who has to come and clean up the mess. I don't know if you remember that part, but like it really is just like this like greatest hits list of disasters. And when you actually look at their track record, I mean, it's the worst of the worst oil spills, but of the actual cleanup, it's pretty horrible, their actual track record of actually getting these areas back to being an environmentally solid and decent state.
Right, and I know I didn't use the words cover up lightly, but there's a well-documented case for the Michigan spill, at least, where Widow Bryan's told contractors who were on the scenes doing cleanup for their cleanup just to literally cover up the spill with mud to make it look good for regulators who came on the scene later. So it's not. I didn't use the word just to.
Why don't they just get like a big carpet and like sweep the oil underneath a carpet or something like that? It's like let's cover it with mud. Oh my
exactly.
God!
So there's mud there. But the other example of the more well-known cover-up, although that was well documented in some journalism that was done by On Earth magazine, the publication that the Natural Resource Defense Council puts out. The other huge example that more people know about is the toxic dispersants that were sprayed into the Gulf of Mexico to disperse the oil so that it looked better, so that it wasn't on the surface. But all that literally meant is that it was dispersed, that it may sink, that it may not be visible, for flyovers and that type of thing. That came after BP had implemented a no-fly zone in the area that no one could fly over for a period of time through the Federal Aviation Administration. So
because clearly BP should also have the right to control the airwaves, and actually say you can't have a fly zone over the ocean.
Right.
That's something that a private company clearly should have the right to do in America.
Correct. So so the dispersants were the big thing then, and there's just no proof that actually would clean up the spill. It would just clean up BP's image for the horrifying image of that toxic gunk on top of the Gulf of Mexico wouldn't be present anymore. And they were advised to do that by Widow Bryan, sort of the PR machine behind the curtain that told it to do it, probably alongside BP's PR people as well.